Hi, my angels, it's Hailey Reese, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. I am so grateful that you are here, and I hope that you are having an absolutely fantastic morning, afternoon, or night, whatever it is for you when this video finally reaches you. Oh boy, today's video is absolutely chilling and one that I am so excited to dive into with you guys for a number of reasons, but specifically because I'm curious what you think occurred and what you think is out there by the end of today's video. Now, I have skimmed this story. I do know where it's going. And again, it was one of those ones that keep you up at night. But what I found interesting about this particular experience was the level of detail that gave us a look into what so many people are experiencing across the world, something that even Tyler and I have experienced. And we'll get into that a little bit later in the video. So I have the experience here in front of me, and we are going to dive through it together. It is a whirlwind of emotions that lead to a terrifying place. Before I get into today's video though, I would just very quickly like to mention that if you do enjoy my content and you want to see more of it, I would greatly appreciate you clicking subscribe, giving this video a big thumbs up, and leaving a comment down below. But with all of that being said, sit back, relax, maybe turn a light on because this is about to be dark. This experience dates back well over a decade now, but it haunts me to this day as if it only just happened. I had just turned 16 and, like many of my peers, wanted to earn some extra money by picking up babysitting gigs in the area. This was well before you could search for jobs online of this sort, so I thought it would be wise to print out flyers with my name, landline number, and my qualifications as a new babysitter. I hung them all throughout the town and around the local schools. I should probably mention that the town I lived in was one very small. Though it was very small, it had many local residents. There was only one preschool, one elementary school, and one high school. Like most smaller towns, locals really trusted one another. If a neighbor needed help, you would be there. If a parent asked to coordinate a playdate, you would trust to send your child willingly. So, placing my name, number, and age for any and all to find didn't seem so dangerous back then. Our town was religious, God-fearing to its core. The locals were churchgoers, and the children were raised as such. There was no room in our homes for any talk of the supernatural or ungodly beings. This didn't stop us, though. As teenagers, despite being brought up in a manner like this, we would still have our fun with the scary stories and the urban legends. I remember often hearing about the beings in the woods that lived beyond our city's limits. Rumor had it that the beings couldn't make it into our godly town, so we all felt safe within it. But I will admit that after hearing these stories, driving out of the town's bounds with your parents at night had you looking into the dark forest differently. There were people who lived on large land outside of the town, and some kids that attended my school were among them. We would often ask them what it was like living in those dark woods with nothing but land around them, but most would just laugh. On an occasion, a boy did share a story of a creature in the woods. He said the creature would come out after dark and call him outside of his window. He said he always kept the window shut, but when he would catch a glimpse of the creature among him, it was never quite the same. Sometimes it was a familiar face, but he knew inside that it wasn't a familiar to him. We all thought he was just being one of the boys, trying to scare the others and make them look foolish in front of the girls. No one ever thought that what he saw was anything more than fiction. Halfway into my 16th year, I had gained quite the reputation with the local parents. I hadn't needed to put any more signs around the town because most of my work came from word of mouth. I was responsible and I was good with children. I was babysitting some child nearly 5 nights a week. In late November, I was home alone after returning from school when our phone began to ring. On the other end was a lovely gentleman by the name of Alan. He said he had heard from one of his friends that I was babysitting in town and explained that he was in a real pinch. He desperately needed a babysitter for his 5-year-old daughter Delilah for the following night. He had a local show at the bar he wanted to see, but his sitter had canceled last minute. I felt for him and I told him I could, asking the time and the address. He proceeded to tell me all of the details and which line he lived on. It was far, and it would be late into the night. I think he could sense my hesitation as he quickly threw in that he would pay me triple my rates for the distance and the last-minute help. I thought about the stories of those woods at night and almost didn't want to go, but quickly felt foolish when I thought of the money, so I agreed. The following day, my folks drove me deep into the country roads and dropped me off at just dusk, as I still wasn't driving yet. Both my folks met with Alan, and as I had told them from the phone call, they agreed he was a kind man. Alan told my folks he'd be returning around 1 a.m., so if they could pick me up just after then. And within minutes, I was meeting one of the most beautiful little girls I'd ever met. Property was huge, surrounded by fields and forestry on the horizon. I reckon the nearest house wasn't for miles, and besides the sound of our shoes on the gravel, it was as quiet as could be. The quiet was eerie and unsettling. Delilah, however, seemed to be an angel, with her blonde, bouncy curls and deep-sea eyes. She radiated southern charm and manners and was eager to get to playing with me and her dolls. Despite how unsettled I was by the land and approaching darkness, I was feeling especially grateful that I had decided to take the job and actually hoped there would be more opportunity. She seemed like an easy kid to watch. The two of us played, I fed her some dinner, and I got her ready for bed. She wasn't fussy and followed routine perfectly. And with that, she was asleep, and I was alone in this big, old farm house in the middle of nowhere. The house had one landline situated in the kitchen by the living room. It was certainly old, but it was cozy, lived in, and seemingly full of love. I checked the clock and it was approaching 9 p.m. I remember that so specifically because I had calculated how long until the night was complete. I flicked on the TV and pulled my homework from my bag. I worked on my project for a couple of hours when suddenly the energy around me started to shift. Even after all these years, I still can't find the words to explain it, other than a dreadful feeling that something had just went horribly wrong. I looked at the clock and it was just after 11 p.m. I tried to convince myself that I was only freaking myself out because it was getting later, and from the many surrounding windows, very clear just how in the middle of nowhere I was. I continued doing what I was doing when I began to hear a knock at the front door. I completely paused, thinking for sure I had imagined it, when the knock came again, but this time louder, almost as if I was in my own real-life horror film. Just as I got towards the front door and nearly reached for it, the family phone began ringing. I remember so clearly how it made me jump and how my stomach had completely sunk. I was shaking because, as I have mentioned, the nearest house was miles away and no one was to be expected home yet. I walked towards the front door and I flicked the porch light on. The door had no peephole, but there was a window close by, so I slowly walked towards the window and I peered outside, only to find an empty porch. At this point, I was certain that I was scaring myself to the point of delusion. I whispered under my breath while laughing that I was losing it and there was nobody there. And right as I did, the phone began ringing loudly again, piercing through the house. I figured it may be Alan checking in on Delilah, so I promptly went and lifted it off the hook. All I could hear was an eerie static. No one was there at all. I began to walk back to the couch to try and distract myself when I heard what sounded like someone talking upstairs. I couldn't hear what was being said, just a low and muffled voice. As I walked towards the stairs, the voice disappeared, but the voice in my head told me I needed to check on Delilah. I walked slowly up the creaking stairs, hoping not to wake her. As I reached Delilah's room, I noticed her bed seemed to be empty. Panic filled me as I raced to turn on her light. There stood Delilah, peering in her pajamas out the bedroom window in almost a trance-like state. I quickly asked her what she was doing and why she was out of her bed as she turns towards me with fear on her face, saying something like, "I don't want to go. I don't want to see him." I was confused. I tried to tell her she was simply dreaming and that she didn't need to go anywhere but back to bed. But within seconds, she began screaming, full-blown hysteria, and begging me not to make her go. I promised her that she wasn't going anywhere, and it was all just a bad dream. I put her back in the bed, but not without feeling her fear within me too. I don't like him, she said, as I walked down the stairs. As I walked back downstairs, I noticed now that it was almost midnight. I started changing my mind about ever wanting to come back here. Something felt very, very wrong on this property. 1 more hour was all I could keep telling myself. 1 more hour and never again. 1 more hour. I sat back down in silence now because something felt off with Delilah, and I wanted to hear if she got up again. Moments later, my breath was sucked out of me, banging on the door, but this time, hard, aggressive. I walked towards the door shaking, my gut telling me that whoever it is was up to nothing good and begging me to turn around. The porch light was still on now, so I walked back towards the window. The banging had stopped again, but the feeling hadn't. I peeked through the window, expecting the porch to be empty again, but to my horror, there it was. A man with his back to the window I peered out of, just standing and staring there. I put my hand over my mouth and looked in horror as the man turned towards me, as if he knew where I was so sharply. And that was when I saw the man was Alan. He began talking to me, but something felt different. He was telling me to open the door, that he needed to be let in. I knew it looked like the Alan I had met, but it didn't sound like him. There was something in the way he smiled as he spoke, and how his eyes suddenly didn't blink that felt off. Started to wonder if he was just drunk, but it didn't feel or seem that way. I asked him why he couldn't let himself in, and he said he'd left his keys inside, so he needed to be let back in. He told me to hurry, that he had came home early because Delilah had called him. It didn't feel right, but I was in his home with his daughter. I started to walk towards the door when it all hit me. Delilah had never came downstairs, where the only family phone was, so she couldn't have called him. And he couldn't have left his keys. He had locked the door and he had drove away. He needed his keys. I began to gasp when the voice through the door turned angry and shouting now to let them in, now. I ran to the phone where the emergency numbers had been left and I called for Alan. The screaming outside suddenly stopped, but when the voice that answered the bar told me Alan was still there, my stomach dropped. And when Alan came to speak on the phone, I had to hold down my own vomit. He was still at the bar nearly 25 minutes away. I could hear the band playing. That couldn't have been him at the door. I tried to explain what had happened to Alan, but he could hardly hear me. He said he'd be home shortly, and he got off the phone. I thought about calling for police, but I was questioning my own sanity. How could I just explain a man nowhere near the home was trying to be let inside by me? I ran to the bathroom to throw up and splash some water on my face. I paced the house, sure I had gone crazy. I was so terrified I ran up the stairs to Delilah's room, where she was fast asleep, and sat on the floor by her bed, my head in my hands. What felt like hours, but was only minutes had passed, Delilah's little voice would come through the silence. "Thank you," she would say. I wasn't sure what for. I assumed since she had had the nightmare, maybe she was happy for the company in her room. But what came next will haunt me for the rest of my life. That wasn't my daddy. I wanted to ask her who or what it was, her words from earlier flooding back, but I had nothing but fear inside of me, and I didn't even want to know more. Not long after, her father came home, unlocking the door for himself. With the keys, he had in fact taken with him. I still remember how he explained that Delilah's common nightmares must have just freaked me out and played mind tricks on me. It seemed like it wasn't the first time she had warned him of something waiting for her and her not wanting to go. I knew it was real, but I didn't bother continuing the talk. I needed to get home. The whole way home, I kept my eyes closed, scared that whatever it was would come back. All these years have passed, and the fear never goes away. Something was out in that woods, something pretending to be Alan, and it wanted to get to Delilah. What it was, I'll probably never know. Anyone I seem to tell has a different answer for me. A skinwalker, a demon, or maybe just my teenage hormonal imagination. I don't know what it was that wanted in, or why it chose that night to try it, or even what would have happened had I have opened the door. All I know is I never want to see it again, and that was the end of my babysitting career. I have so many thoughts about this encounter, starting with the fact that I have noticed an increase lately, specifically of people sharing their experiences on TikTok, with seeing someone that's supposed to be familiar to them, but knowing and having proof that who they encountered or who was outside truly wasn't that individual. If you guys had watched my series back when Tyler and I lived in a haunted house, we had a couple of experiences where Tyler was certain he saw me in the house, but it wasn't me, and it was proved to him that it wasn't me. Times that I saw or heard Tyler in the house, but it wasn't him. And it's just eerie to wonder what could be going on and what these things are. Now, another note I want to touch on in this experience is that whatever this was needed to be let in, couldn't just come in. I mean, had it have been a man who wanted to break and enter into the home or cause any sort of harm, I'm sure he could have tried a lot harder to have gotten in. He was incredibly adamant on this person letting him in to the house. And we've talked about it so many times here before, but demons require permission to enter. Makes you wonder if it was demonic or an evil entity. I don't know. You guys know how I feel about terrifying babysitting experiences. We all know. But honestly, I truly don't know what it is that could have happened that night. And I am so incredibly curious to hear from you guys down in the comment section below what you think it was that was after Delilah. I know for me personally, I'd love to know where Delilah is today. I mean, I'd love to know what ended up following, if it was tied to the property, if it's tied to her specifically, what it could have been, and if it only ever appeared in the place of her father or in the place of anything. I mean, it would make sense if it was trying to get to a little girl. Whom do you feel safer with than your parents? It's an eerie thought. Let me know what you guys think. Well, you guys, that is it for today's video. I really hope that you guys enjoyed this experience. Again, I've been hearing so many people who have had experiences like this, so I thought it'd be a really fascinating one to cover. Have you ever had an experience of the sorts? If you're comfortable, I would love to hear your experience down below. I'll be reading through all of the comments, and that is it for today's video. If you guys are new to my channel or you are just not yet subscribed, but you enjoy my content, I would love it if you would go ahead and click that subscribe button, and please give this video a big thumbs up if you did enjoy it. I really truly appreciate it. Remember, my loves, do all things with kindness, and until next time, I love you. Bye, guys.